Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation, Training Module for the Information and Communication Standard. Disclaimer: this training resource is not legal advice, and should you require assistance in interpreting the legislation or the regulation, please contact your legal advisor. This resource has been created to assist in understanding the legislation and/or regulation, and does not replace the official version of the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation, Ontario Regulation 191/11, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act 2005, AODA. If there is any conflict between this resource, the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation, and the AODA, the regulation and the AODA are the final authorities. This resource may be used for non-commercial, not-for-profit purposes only in meeting the requirements of the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation 191/11. Information and Communication Standard. The Information and Communication Standard is part of the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation. It establishes processes that businesses and organizations in Ontario must follow to create, provide, and receive information and communications in ways that are accessible to people with disabilities. Let's start by watching the introductory video for the Information and Communication Standard. Consider for a moment what you've done so far today. Perhaps you browsed a newspaper on the internet or checked your email. Maybe you attended a meeting or had a casual conversation with a colleague in the hall or through instant messaging. So much of our world today is about information and communications, from chatting with your son or daughter to reaching out to colleagues. But imagine what it would be like if all those lines of communication suddenly became blocked. If, when surfing the internet, some pages just don't work. When you open up a document that you were told contains information you need, such as a bus schedule, it's unreadable. Or what if, while in a meeting, suddenly, it's as if the sound is turned off? If your access to information was turned off, how would you know what's going on in the world around you? How would you make decisions? It would be like entering a world where everything appears to be the same, but rather than finding information that will allow you to participate, you find barriers. Always another barrier. The good news is there are solutions to information and communication barriers. For example, technology. For people without disabilities, technology makes things convenient. For people with disabilities, technology makes things possible, as long as they're set up right. For example, if you're following web development best practices, your website may only need a few tweaks to be accessible to those with disabilities. In addition, some accessible solutions can be as simple as reading a document out loud to someone, or providing an electronic version so they can resize the text to suit their needs. Making information and communications accessible is not only helpful to people with disabilities, it benefits us all. A properly formatted document or accessible website displays properly in all browsers, including personal handheld devices. The Information and Communication Standard, as covered in this module, outlines how organizations will be required to create, provide, and receive information and communications in ways that are accessible to people with disabilities. About this module. In this module, you will learn about the requirements of the Information and Communication Standard, accessible formats and communication supports, feedback processes, emergency procedures, plans or public safety information, accessible websites and web content, educational and training institutions, educational and training resources and materials, training to educators, libraries of educational and training institutions, producers of educational or training material, public libraries. A glossary of key terms for the standard appears at the end of this module. Accessible formats and communication supports. When requested, you must provide information and communications in an accessible manner to people with disabilities. Alternatives to standard print are often referred to as accessible formats, and ways to help communication between people are referred to as communication supports. When a request is received, you must consult with the person to determine their accessibility needs. You have the flexibility to determine the most appropriate accessible format or communication support depending on the accessibility needs of the person and the capability of your organization to deliver. Examples of accessible formats and communication supports. Accessible formats and communication supports must be provided in a timely manner and at a cost that is not more than the regular costs charged to other people. Examples of alternate formats and communication supports. Reading written information to a person directly. Large print. Text transcripts of audio or visual information. Handwritten notes instead of spoken word. Information written in plain language. An electronic document formatted to be accessible for use with a screen reader. Deadlines for providing accessible formats and communication supports. Here are the compliance deadlines for providing accessible formats and communication supports. Government of Ontario and Legislative Assembly must comply by January 1, 2014. Large designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1, 2015. Small designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1, 2016. Large private and not-for-profit organizations with 50 or more employees must comply by January 1, 2016. Small private and not-for-profit organizations with 1 to 49 employees must comply by January 1, 2017. Exceptions to the requirement. This requirement is about providing accessible information and communications about goods, services, or facilities offered to customers, clients, and others. The requirement does not apply to the following: products and product labels. Example: a store that sells DVDs does not have to make its products or product labels accessible, but the store must still take into account a person's disability when communicating with them about their products, such as verbally informing a customer with vision loss about their DVD selection. Information that you do not control directly or indirectly through a contract, unless your organization is involved in education or training as defined in the regulation. Information or communications that cannot be converted. When it's not possible. There might be instances when you are unable to convert the requested information or communication. For example, if the technology to convert the information is not readily available, or the information may be lost in the conversion process and cannot be conveyed in a meaningful way. For example, visual information in an X-ray or architectural blueprint. When it's not possible to convert the requested material, you need to provide the individual making the request with the following: an explanation as to why the information or communications are unconvertible, and a summary of the information or communications. Feedback processes. Under the accessibility standard for customer service, organizations had to establish a customer service feedback process for receiving and responding to feedback about how they provide goods or services to people with disabilities. Your organization may have other types of external or internal feedback processes, for example, online surveys or forms, email, phone, or print. Under the Information and Communication Standard, if your organization has feedback processes in place, you must make them accessible. This may include arranging for accessible formats and communication supports on request, notifying the public about the availability of accessible formats and communication supports, Compliance deadlines for feedback processes. Here are the compliance deadlines to make feedback processes accessible. Government of Ontario and Legislative Assembly must comply by January 1st, 2013. Large designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1st, 2014. Small designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1st, 2015. Large organizations with 50 or more employees must comply by January 1st, 2015. Small organizations with 1 to 49 employees must comply by January 1st, 2016. Emergency procedures, plans, or public safety information. If your organization provides emergency procedures, plans, or public safety information to the public, you must provide these in an accessible format on request. The deadline to comply is January 1st, 2012. Examples of emergency information include, but are not limited to, emergency plans and procedures, maps, warning signs, and evacuation routes, information you give the public about alarms or other emergency alerts. Real-time emergency information, such as announcements and alarms, is not included in this requirement. Knowledge check. The information and communication standard applies to which of the following? Choose the best response. A. Information that you do not control directly or indirectly through a contract, unless your organization is involved in education or training. B. Products and product labels. C. Information and communications about products and services that your organization provides. D. Information and communications that cannot be converted. Knowledge check answer. The correct answer is C. The information and communication standard applies to information and communications about products and services that your organization provides. Accessible websites and web content. An organization's website is often a primary way it shares information. That's why it's important that your website and web content be accessible. Your organization must conform with the International Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0, as outlined in the standard. These guidelines were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, and explain how to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. WCAG 2.0 has different levels of compliance that determine how accessible a site is. Examples of WCAG web accessibility features. Examples of web page features required by the WCAG compliance levels A and AA include the following. Level A feature. Alternative text appears when your mouse hovers over an image. It's important to use appropriate text when describing an image so that screen reader technology can describe the image to a person with vision loss. Level AA feature. Properly named headings and labels enable people using screen reader technology to scan through information on a web page efficiently. For example, to quickly identify what stories are on the homepage of a newspaper, a screen reader can search just the headings for each story. Properly labeled headings allow the screen reader to tell when one article stops and the next begins. If this is not done, every individual article will be read as one story. Each header should be labeled with the news article's subject. This allows users to easily find the information they want. Compliance deadlines for website accessibility requirements. Here are the compliance deadlines for websites and web content. Government of Ontario and Legislative Assembly. To set an example for other organizations, the Government of Ontario and Legislative Assembly have earlier deadlines than other organizations in meeting the requirements. See the Timelines tool for details. All designated public sector organizations and all large organizations. By January 1st, 2014, new internet websites and web content available on these sites must conform with WCAG 2.0 Level A. By January 1st, 2021, all Internet websites and all web content available on these sites developed after January 1st, 2012 must conform with WCAG 2.0 Level AA. The exceptions are live captioning and pre-recorded audio descriptions. There are no website requirements for small organizations, 1 to 49 employees. Knowledge check. By which date must all new Internet websites of designated public sector organizations and large organizations conform with WCAG 2.0 Level A requirements? A. 2014. B. 2016. C. 2021. Knowledge check answer. The correct answer is A. By January 1st, 2014, all new Internet websites of designated public sector organizations and large organizations must conform with WCAG 2.0 Level A. Educational and training institutions. Certain sections of the standard apply specifically to educational and training institutions, such as public and private elementary and secondary schools, colleges and universities, other educational and training organizations defined in the regulation. Which educational and training institutions must comply? Institutions that must comply include organizations governed by the Education Act or the Private Career Colleges Act, 2005. Organizations offering all or part of a post-secondary program leading to a degree pursuant to consent granted under the Post-Secondary Education Choice and Excellence Act, 2000. Designated public sector organizations, colleges and universities, described in paragraph 3 or 4 of Schedule 1 of the IASR. Public or private organizations that provide courses or programs or both that result in the acquisition by students of a diploma or certificate named by the Minister of Education under the Education Act, subsection 8(1), paragraph 1. A private school within the meaning of the Education Act. Requirements specific to educational and training institutions. The following sections of the standard apply specifically to educational and training institutions: educational and training resources and materials, training to educators, libraries of educational and training institutions. These requirements are outlined on the next few slides. Educational and training resources and materials. If you belong to an educational or training institution and a student notifies you of a need due to a disability, you must provide learning resources or material in an accessible format that takes into account their accessibility needs. Provide student records and program information in an accessible format that takes into account their accessibility needs. You can provide the student with one of the following: an accessible or conversion-ready electronic format where available, or a comparable resource in an accessible or conversion-ready format if the resource cannot be obtained or converted to an accessible format. Compliance deadlines for training resources and materials. Here are the compliance deadlines for educational and training institutions to meet the requirements of this section. Large designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1st, 2013. Large organizations with 50 or more employees must comply by January 1st, 2013. Small designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1st, 2015. Small organizations with 1 to 49 employees must comply by January 1st, 2015. Training to educators. Educators need to know how to make their teaching accessible. This means that educational and training institutions must provide educators with accessibility awareness training related to accessible course delivery and instruction. Keep records of training provided including the dates it was provided and the number of individuals trained. Compliance deadlines for educator training. Here are the compliance deadlines for organizations to provide their educators with accessibility awareness training. Large designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1st, 2013. Large organizations with 50 or more employees must comply by January 1st, 2013. Small designated public sector organizations must comply by January 1st, 2015. Small organizations with 1 to 49 employees must comply by January 1st, 2015. Libraries of educational and training institutions. Where available, libraries of educational or training institutions must provide an accessible or conversion-ready format of print, digital, or multimedia resources or materials on request. The following are exempt from the requirements: special collections, archival materials, rare books, donations. Compliance deadlines for library materials. Here are the deadlines for libraries of educational and training institutions to meet the requirements of this section. By January 1st, 2015, they must provide accessible formats for print-based resources or materials on request. By January 1st, 2020, they must provide accessible formats for digital or multimedia resources or materials on request. Producers of educational or training material. Producers of educational or training textbooks and print-based learning resources who supply educational and training institutions must provide accessible or conversion-ready versions when requested. Examples of producers include but are not limited to publishing companies, universities, school boards. Compliance deadlines for this section. Here are the deadlines for producers of educational or training material to meet the requirements of this section. By January 1st, 2015, they must provide accessible or conversion-ready versions of textbooks on request. By January 1st, 2020, they must provide accessible or conversion-ready versions of printed educational or training supplementary learning resources on request. Public libraries. Public libraries must provide or arrange to provide accessible materials where they exist, when requested. Make information publicly available to inform people that materials can be provided in an accessible format on request. Keep in mind that this information needs to be accessible as well. The deadline for public library boards to comply is January 1st, 2013. Knowledge check. Which of the following statements is false? Choose the best response. A. Special collections and rare books must be provided in an accessible format at libraries of educational and training institutions. B. Student records must be provided in accessible formats on request. C. Educational and training institutions must provide educators with accessibility awareness training. D. Colleges and universities must provide learning materials in accessible formats on request. Knowledge check answer. The correct answer is A is false. Special collections and rare books are exempt from having to be provided in accessible or conversion-ready formats. Summary. You have now completed the Information and Communication Standard module.